Part 1, The Assignment. It was the summer of 2013. I was studying architecture, and I was doing my summer internship at a small restoration firm near Marseille, in the south of France. The company specialized in taking old manor houses and chateaux, crumbling, forgotten buildings, and giving them new life, turning them into boutique hotels or private residences. Pause. The owner of the firm was a man named Monsieur Delacroix. He was in his 60s, strict but fair, the kind of man who noticed everything and said very little. One afternoon, he called me into his office and gave me something he called a small assignment. Out in the Provençal countryside, at the foot of the Luberon Mountains, there was an 18th century estate called Maison Renard. The house had been empty for 50 years. Its last owner had died decades ago, and the inheritance had been tied up in a family dispute ever since. Now, finally, the dispute was settled. A new owner wanted to convert it into a guest house, and our firm had been asked to do the preliminary structural assessment. "You'll go alone," Delacroix told me. "You'll need to stay 2 nights because the nearest hotel is 40 minutes away, and driving back and forth every day would waste time. The house has electricity and running water now, so don't worry. There's basic comfort. It's just a strange place. The villagers don't much care for it." "Strange how?" I asked. He shrugged. "Old houses are like that. Creaks, stories. Don't take it too seriously." At the time, I didn't think much of those words. I was 22, hungry for adventure, and the idea of staying alone in a large historic building sounded exciting rather than unsettling. Delacroix's firm had been in the family for 3 generations. His grandfather had started it after the war, buying up crumbling estates that no one else wanted and slowly bringing them back to life. Delacroix used to say that every old building in Provence had a memory it hadn't finished having. His own strange way of explaining why some houses felt heavier than others, why some renovations went smoothly and others seemed cursed with delays, accidents, workers quitting without notice. Pause. I'd always assumed this was just the kind of thing an old man says to make his work sound more romantic than it is. I didn't think there was anything literal in it. Looking back now, I'm less sure. Part 2, The Road. I rented a small car in Marseille and set off. After about 2 hours of driving, I left the main road and turned onto a narrow path lined with trees. Ancient oaks stood on either side, their branches arching so closely over the road that even in broad daylight, the inside of the car dimmed, as if evening had come early. After roughly 15 minutes on that forest road, the trees suddenly opened up, and Maison Renard appeared in front of me. The house was much larger than I'd expected. 3 stories, built of pale yellow stone, with tall windows and a steep roof, a classic Provençal manor. But the neglect was visible everywhere. The shutters hung crooked. The garden had been completely swallowed by weeds. Cracks ran through the stone steps at the front entrance. The drive itself had been beautiful, in the way the Provençal countryside always is in July. Golden fields of wheat, distant hills the color of lavender even where no lavender grew, the occasional stone farmhouse with its shutters thrown open against the heat. I remember thinking, somewhere on that drive, that this was exactly the kind of assignment I'd hoped for when I chose architecture. Real history, real stone, a real story behind every crack in a wall. But the moment I turned onto that tree-lined path, the mood of the whole afternoon changed. It wasn't just the darkness under the branches. It was a kind of pressure, faint but unmistakable, the sort of feeling you get walking into a room where people have just stopped talking about you. I told myself it was nerves. 22-year-olds are good at telling themselves things. When I stepped out of the car, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No birdsong, no wind. It felt as though the house was swallowing every sound around it before it could reach me. I used the key Delacroix had given me to open the front door. Inside, it was less dusty than I'd expected from the outside. Clearly, someone came by from time to time to do basic upkeep. A wide entrance hall greeted me, staircases curving up on either side, and along the walls hung faded family portraits that had clearly been there for decades, untouched. I set my things down in a ground floor room I planned to use as my workspace and decided to walk through the house while there was still daylight. Part 3, The House. The ground floor was as I'd expected, a large drawing room, a dining room, a kitchen, a library. Everything looked old but structurally sound. The notes I wrote down were minor. The library was my favorite room, in spite of everything that happened later. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, most of the books still in place. Their spines faded to the same soft brown regardless of what color they'd started as. A reading chair sat by the window, angled just slightly toward the door rather than the view outside. An odd choice for a room built to look out over the gardens, I remember thinking. As if whoever sat there had wanted to see who was coming in, more than they wanted to see the sunset. Pause. I made a note about a water stain on the ceiling, took a few photographs for the file, and moved on the way you do when you're 22 and being paid by the day. When I went up to the second floor, something at the end of the corridor caught my eye. A closed door. Beat. Every other door in the house stood half open or unlocked, but this one was sealed with an old, rusted padlock. I made a note in my file, "Not inspected, locked," and I kept moving. The third floor was the attic, low-ceilinged storage rooms full of dusty furniture, old trunks, frameless paintings. In one of the trunks, I found yellowed photographs and letters. My French was good, but deciphering the old handwriting took time. From what I could gather, the last residents of the house were the Renard family, who had lived there in the 1960s. A mother, a father, and their only daughter. One letter, written by the mother to her sister, caught my attention. Roughly translated, it read, "Camille wants to go into that room again. I don't let her, but at night I hear her standing outside the door. Henri says it's just her imagination, but I'm not so sure." I didn't know who Camille was, a daughter, perhaps, or a servant. But the phrase "that room" immediately brought to mind the locked door on the second floor. Part 4, the first night. By evening, I'd settled into my ground floor room, with a small camp bed and a folding table set up. Aside from a few generator-powered lamps, the house had no working lights. The main electrical line hadn't been fully restored yet. After eating, I tried to organize my notes, but a strange restlessness had settled over me. I couldn't quite explain why, only that the house didn't feel empty. It felt as though something, somewhere, was watching me. Toward midnight, I heard the first sound. From upstairs, from the second floor, a faint creak. Beat. I told myself it was normal for an old house, wood contracting in the cool night air. But the creaking was regular, rhythmic, like footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps. I tried to sleep, couldn't. Around 1 in the morning, the sound changed. It was no longer footsteps. Now it was a faint clicking, like metal scraping against metal. Pause. My mind went straight to the padlock. Gathering my courage, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the stairs. The corridor looked far longer in the dark than it had during the day. When I reached the locked door, the sound stopped. I looked at the padlock. It was exactly where it had been, closed, untouched. But from beneath the door, a thin line of light was seeping out, as if a candle or a lamp were burning inside. That was impossible. The room had been locked for 50 years. There was no electrical wiring running to it. I backed away, went downstairs, locked my own door, and lay down on the bed. I didn't sleep again that night. Part 5, the village. When morning came, I'd made a decision. I needed to go down to the village and find out more about this house. The nearest one, St. Elian, was 15 minutes away by car. A few hundred people, a typical Provençal village. I sat down in the village's only cafe and ordered a coffee. The owner, a woman in her 60s named Madame Bertrand, changed expression the moment I mentioned Maison Renard. "Why did you go to that house?" she asked, her voice suddenly serious. I explained the restoration project. She sat in silence for a moment, then pulled up a chair across from me. "I grew up here," she said. "I remember the Renard family, the mother, Marguerite, the father, Henri, and their daughter, Camille. Something happened in 1968, no one really knows what, but that year the family left the house suddenly. Henri and Marguerite moved to the city, but no one ever saw Camille again." "What do you mean, never saw her again?" I asked. "Officially, the records say Camille was sent to relatives in Switzerland. But no one in the village ever believed that, because that same year the house's caretaker, there was still a live-in caretaker back then, suddenly quit and left the village overnight without any explanation. Before he left, he told a few people that he'd seen something in a room on the second floor. What did he see? Madame Bertrand shrugged. No one knows exactly, because he left before he could give any details. But there was one thing he said over and over. Camille is still there. But she isn't Camille anymore. Pause. That sentence sent a chill through me. I asked her one more thing, almost without meaning to, whether anyone had ever gone looking for Camille, written to the sanatorium in Switzerland, checked whether she'd actually arrived. Madame Bertrand gave me a small, tired smile, the kind you give someone who's finally asking the right question much too late. Henri did, she said. Years later, after his wife died, I heard he wrote to every sanatorium in that region of Switzerland he could find an address for. Not one of them had any record of a Camille Renard ever being admitted. He never told anyone that, as far as I know, except the priest here, right before he himself passed. The priest told my mother. My mother told me. Beat. She looked at me for a long moment. Henri died in this village, not in the city like everyone assumes. He came back at the very end. Insisted on it. Wanted to be close to the house again, even though he never once went back inside it. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. That sentence sent a chill through me. I finished my coffee, thanked her, and before heading back to the house, I stopped by the village's small town hall to look into the property's old records. Part 6, the records. The clerk at the town hall was an elderly, helpful man. When I explained my research, he pulled an old file from a dusty cabinet, records belonging to Maison Renard. One document, dated 1968, caught my eye. An official notice stating that Camille Renard, 17 years old at the time, had been sent to a sanatorium in Switzerland for health reasons. But beneath the document, in a different hand, as if added later, there was a small note, file incomplete. See local police report, October 14, 1968. I asked the clerk about this report. After a long search, at the very bottom of the archive, he found a yellowed police record. The report was short but clear. On the night of October 14, 1968, the estate's caretaker had called the local police after the family reported an emergency. When the police arrived at the house, they found no one there. Pause. The family appeared to have left suddenly, without preparation. Half-eaten meals still on the table, cabinets left open. In Camille's room, deep scratches had been found on the wall, as though gouged by fingernails, and at the bottom of the report, in the officer's own handwriting, a small note. The scratches run toward the door, not away from it, as if someone had been trying to get out. That detail struck me deeply. Scratches toward the door, from the lock side, toward the lock itself. I asked the clerk if I could see the room's original floor plan, thinking maybe there was some architectural detail I was missing. A second door, a passage, something that would explain how the light I'd seen the night before could exist at all. He found an old blueprint, brittle at the folds, and spread it across the counter for me. Pause. The room was exactly what it appeared to be from the corridor. One door, one window, facing the back garden, no other way in or out. According to the plan, the window had been bricked over at some point after the house was built. You could see the outline of it, faintly, from outside if you knew to look. I hadn't noticed it on my walk around the grounds the day before. I made a point of looking for it on my way back. The clerk also mentioned, almost as an afterthought while refiling the documents, that the padlock on that door wasn't original to the house. It had been added afterward, sometime in late 1968, according to a small receipt tucked into the same folder, from a locksmith in the next town over. Someone, after whatever happened that October, had gone out of their way to make sure that door could never be opened again without a key that, as far as anyone in the village knew, no longer existed. Part 7, the second night. When I got back to the house that evening, I no longer wanted to stay. But my car, strangely, wouldn't start. The battery seemed dead, even though it had worked fine that morning. No help could arrive before the next morning, and the phone signal barely reached that far into the valley. I had no choice. I had to stay one more night. This time I decided to sleep outside, near my car, rather than in my ground floor room. But rain began to fall, a fierce Provençal storm, and eventually I was forced back inside. I remember standing in the entrance hall, soaked, dripping onto the old stone floor, and looking up the staircase toward the second floor for a long moment before I made myself go into my own room instead. Every instinct in me said not to go up there, and every rational part of my brain told me that instinct was nonsense, that I was a tired engineering student who'd read too much into a strange letter and an old woman's village gossip. Pause. I chose to believe the rational part. I'm not sure anymore that it was right. Toward midnight, the sounds began again. This time, clearer, closer, coming from the staircase. Step by step, descending from above. I switched on my flashlight and stood by my door, listening. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, then stopped. Pause right outside my door. A long silence followed. Beat then, from beneath the door, a thin piece of paper slid into the room. I picked it up and shone my flashlight on it. It was old, yellowed paper, and on it, in the same handwriting as the letters I'd found, the mother's handwriting, a single sentence was written. Tell her she can come out now. I didn't dare open the door. That night, I sat with my back against it and stayed awake until morning. Part 8. The morning. When the sun rose, I stepped out. There was no one in front of the door. The corridor was empty. But on the staircase, there were faint, damp marks, the kind left by someone soaked from the rain, leading up from the ground floor toward the second floor. My car started without any trouble that morning. I packed my things, gathered my notes, and left without thinking twice. Back at the office, I gave Delacroix my report, the structural assessment, the technical details, everything complete. But I never mentioned the locked room, the sounds, or the note. I didn't think anyone would believe me. A few months later, I left that job and moved to a different city. Years afterward, I happened to search for Maison Renard online, out of curiosity, and learned that the house had finally been sold, and that during the renovation, the new owners had opened the locked room on the second floor. Inside, they found no human remains. Only, in one corner of the room, an old child's toy and a dusty journal. On the journal's last page, dated 1968, in a young girl's handwriting, a single sentence was written. If the door opens tonight, I won't be me anymore. Ever since that day, I've kept the small piece of paper I found. The one slipped under my door, hidden in a box in my desk drawer, something I've never shown to anyone. Sometimes, late at night, when I hear a creak in my own house, my mind goes straight back to that staircase, those footsteps, and I always ask myself the same question. Who gave me that note? Beat. And when it said, tell her she can come out now, who exactly was it talking about? I still don't know the answer. I've thought over the years about going back just once to stand in front of that house again, now that it belongs to someone else, now that the room has been opened and emptied and presumably painted over like any other guest room in any other boutique hotel. Part of me wants to know if it feels different now, whether the silence is still there, the one that seemed to swallow every other sound the moment I stepped out of my car 12 years ago. I never have gone back. Every time I've planned the drive, something has come up, a work deadline, a family obligation, once even a genuine case of the flu that kept me in bed for a week, the timing of which I still find a little too convenient to laugh off entirely. Pause, maybe that's nothing. Maybe old houses don't reach out across a decade and a country to keep people away from them. I'm an engineer. I believe in load-bearing walls and moisture readings, not in curses. But I still have that piece of paper. And some nights, when the house I live in now settles the way old houses do, creaking somewhere upstairs for no reason at all, I find myself listening a little too closely, waiting to hear whether the sound is going to start moving. It never has. Not yet, anyway. And sometimes, I think it's better that I don't know the rest of it.